House.
Question is that the motion be agreed to. Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr. Speaker, I'm confused. Mr. Speaker, we were told yesterday this bill would be in the name of the Honourable Chris Tremain, and he put out a press release about it. He was kind enough over the weekend to have consultations with me as the Internal Affairs spokesperson, seeing it was the name of the Internal Affairs. And Mr. Speaker, I apologise that I did indicate to you that the bill was in the name of Mr. Tremain, and I accept that the second reading copy of the bill is in the name of the Honourable Nathan Guy. But, Mr. Speaker, sitting on the table of the House is a copy of the SOP and what we're going to be considering tomorrow, and it's in the name of the Honourable Chris Tremain. It's in the name of the Honourable Chris Tremain. And so the question I ask is, does it depend on which day of the week it is? Does it depend on which day of the week it is? Or is this a pathetic approach to make a minister who's being regarded as being generally useless in the primary industries area and in the area of fisheries, to give him something which makes him look good? Well, Mr. Speaker, if that is the case, it's failed. Because, Mr. Speaker, that member just looks more like the idiot that he actually is. He's a village. Well, maybe we are a House of Representatives, and Nathan Guy is a representative of the village idiots. Because, Mr. Speaker, the approach that he is taking to this legislation and to this inquiry and to his portfolio generally is in a way of a level of competence that is just not acceptable for a Minister of the Crown in the realm of New Zealand. Mr. Speaker, it is not acceptable in New Zealand. And the embarrassment that we have, the embarrassment that the Labour opposition has, is that because this legislation is actually quite good, you know, it is a poor. Well, it was developed by the Honourable Sir Geoffrey Winston Russell Palmer. And he, I'm told, is a useless lawyer by the Prime Minister. A useless lawyer who doesn't know what he's talking about. Yet the government picks up his piece of legislation, the thing that he drafted, the bill that he gave to a report to Annette King, that the Honourable Rick Barker introduced to the Parliament, and the government wants to go forward with it. So is he a good lawyer or not? Yes. Does he know what he's talking about or not? Well, the Prime Minister says no, and Tris Tremain or Nathan Guy, whichever it is today or tomorrow, says that in fact he is. There is no doubt, and my experience as Minister of State Services, Minister of Economic Development, was that there is a gap in our inquiries procedures. And the gap is in particular around inquiries that are not into something which is state sector or public service. If it involves the state sector or the public service, I think that our current inquiry system, and if one looks at the state sector legislation, the powers between the Prime Minister and the State Services Commissioner working together, I don't have much doubt that they can set up an inquiry in an appropriate form with the appropriate powers without too many problems at all. But when the issue is one, as with Pike River, maybe as with the calculations around the fisheries, maybe possibly around Sky City and some of the bodgy dealings there, certainly to do with RENA. In that area, the inability of the private sector to deal with the damage that they caused, and I mean clearly RENA was an environmental disaster, but not something on the scale of Pike River. But the principles are the same. There was not a midpoint of inquiry which sat between a ministerial inquiry, which doesn't have the power to send for people to require evidence, etc. The midpoint is not there, and a Royal Commission, which I think most of us would say for the question for RENA is something that was probably unnecessary and too formal and probably too slow as well. I think there is a type of inquiry in between that would be appropriate for something like that, and that's that. In my experience at government, we had a number of issues which we looked at. We probably erred on the side of going upstairs, of getting judges involved and having commissions for things which mightn't otherwise have required commissions as a result of that gap in our legislation. And I'm not quite sure now whether I should be addressing Chris Tremaine or Nathan Guy, because it is a matter which, if we go through the process, has been outlined. And I just want to also say that I was advised. I don't normally sort of disclose the advice that happens between the Leader of the House and myself, but I was advised to communicate with Chris Tremaine on this legislation, as he was the Minister in charge of the bill, and in fact spent a number of occasions, both on the phone and by text, communicating with Chris Tremaine, and the Leader of the House was the person who indicated to me that was the right person to communicate with. So, well, that's right. Well, no. Well, I think to be fair for Mr. Brownlee, Mr. Tremaine thought he was in charge of the legislation after Cabinet yesterday. After Cabinet yesterday, he put out a press release as Minister in charge of the legislation. But I suppose it's one of those things. The only constant thing is change, and what we're seeing is a bit of change here in this area. But to the Minister in charge of the bill, and I work on the assumption, seeing Nathan Guy is in the House today, that he will be able to communicate, because what I indicated was that we did want to have a bit more discussion on the bill around the natural justice provisions. Now, I think we're just about convinced that the amendments that were proposed to us by Chris Tremaine, and can I just, by way of interjection across the House to Nathan Guy, Mr. Guy, are you standing by the amendments that were given to the House in the name of Mr. Tremaine? You're proposing to go forward with the SOPs? Yeah, he is. Okay. Well, I think we're just about there. The main area, the main question that we had in that particular area was to do with the natural justice provisions. Made the concerns known to Chris Tremaine. He came back to us, and I think we are just about convinced, because it is in some of these things there is a balance around speed. There's a balance around the speed of the inquiry and the importance of getting it right. But there is one area, and the SOP, I want to make it clear to Nathan Guy, is on the table and is in my name. Just to make it clear, where we have there is a discussion there on the question of whether or not in clause 15, clause 15 relates to where there is an exclusion of the public or things are being held in secret. And I can accept, and in a lot of cases, the Nicholas case will be a very good example of it, that it is appropriate to have some issues dealt with in a private session, with evidence suppressed, with confidentiality guaranteed. But what the view of the Labour Party is that, on balance, there should be a presumption of openness and transparency around the inquiry. And we're pretty sure, just from the discussions that have been had previously, that the government's on that page as well. What we are not convinced of is that clause 15, as it is currently drafted, makes it clear that's the balance. And I want to leave it with the Minister and say that we are looking forward to being supportive with legislation that we do want to get so it lasts beyond government, so that we can use it later next year if we have to for the inquiries that come up. But I asked him to look at that. It mightn't be perfectly drafted. I take responsibility for that, but if the principle can be adopted by the government and there can be better drafting in order to do it, it will help the smoother passage of the legislation.
Chris Ockenvold.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to rise to speak in favour